Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I am a former politician, a member of parliament in Austria with the Greens. I'm a feminist and a human rights advocate. And for the past 30 years, my work was dedicated to defending women's rights, especially of migrant women, and those of same-sex attracted people, lesbians and gay men. But in recent years, I have seen that those rights have been eroded at an alarming pace. So the question is, does gender self-ID threaten women's rights? The answer is yes, and I want to explain why. Across Europe, political parties on the left, center, but also conservatives, have embraced gender self-ID without scrutiny and without debate. Women's spaces were opened up to men, or men who say that they are women. Lesbians are being pressured to accept male-bodied individuals, that is, men, as partners. And children, without age restriction, can now legally identify into the opposite sex and have their documents changed accordingly. This is possible, for example, in Germany, with a new law since November last year. The same law also punishes publicly disclosing any information about an individual's transition, with an exception made only for very close relatives, for the spouse and for children, but only for those from before transition. Key EU documents like the LGBTIQ equality strategy promote self-ID without age limits throughout the work of the Commission and the funding of the Commission. And all of this without consultation with women's groups or with lesbian activists. And there are plenty of us who have been sounding the alarm about the harms that this is doing. But here in Brussels, we are without funding and without platform and without access to the roundtables and the stakeholder meetings that may or may not take place on these issues. It is infuriating and it is insulting that women's rights are ignored when policies, recommendations, guidelines, strategies are developed that affect us, and those of us asserting our boundaries are dismissed as outdated and regressive and are vilified as TERFs. Imagine this, being shunned and shamed for being feminists. In the EU, we now hardly ever speak of women. Women's organizations change their names, their priorities, their agenda in anticipatory obedience. Their language shifts to be inclusive of men. They are hesitant to speak of women. They put an asterisk next to it to signal that they stand on the right side and to avoid backlash and secure their funding. Lesbian organizations do the same, and they compromise the core of being a lesbian, a same-sex attracted woman. I have seen this unfold over and over again on the national level and on the European level. The policy shifts and the ambiguity from equality between women and men to gender equality, to gender identity, to women and girls and all their diversity have tangible consequences. The broadening of definitions lead to policies that no longer specifically address the needs of women, making it harder to implement measures that address sex-based discrimination. And we lose the legal grounds and the rights to establish and operate single-sex services and facilities, spaces that were set up in the first place to protect women from men, regardless of what those say their intentions or their identities are. Terms like SOGIESque, I don't know if any of you have heard that before, SOGIESque, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression and sex characteristics, create an imagined community with shared needs that does not exist. A 65-year-old straight man, father of 4, who thinks of himself as a woman, has nothing in common with a 20-year-old lesbian. Activists push for vague and confusing language, terms even like gender identity, misgendering, queer, cisgender, to obscure reality and shut down debate. And I know what I'm talking about. I have heard these from colleagues from my own party, but also from other parties. They tell me in personal conversation that in principle, they agree with what I say. But that they do not really understand the issue or the language, that it is too complex, that they are themselves straight. They also say that they will never talk about this publicly because they know about the ostracism that is going on. They know that it is coming from our own parties, our own institutions, from academia, from media, from NGOs, from activists, from social media. Under a framing of human rights, political parties have been captured by a dynamic that turned them into authoritarian echo chambers. There are three aspects of this that I want to highlight. First, the focus has shifted. We still think of these questions, issues that affect women and children and society at large, as a matter of LGBTIQ rights. Subsequently, politicians hesitate to take a closer look and be critical of the demands that come from what used to be a trusted group of activists. But the definitions have changed. LGBTIQ no longer means lesbian and gay. On the contrary, it is in conflict with them. But well-funded organizations still use the legacy of the lesbian and gay movement and set an overarching agenda, and politicians follow without question. Secondly, it is knee-jerk tribalism in politics. Politicians are afraid to engage critically with these issues because they fear aligning with the wrong side. But it is a very bad look when progressives refuse to defend women's rights for fear of being perceived on the wrong side, or simply not edgy enough, not avant-garde enough, too old and too boring for only speaking about women and women's rights. And finally, there is widespread fear of the consequences of being critical, of risking one's reputation, career, livelihood, social standing. Everybody knows about the repercussions. It silences many who, in private, agree, but are afraid of the backlash. It drives a political system in which no one dares to speak. But political leadership should not be modeled upon fear. The cowardice leads to more conformity and complicity. No matter how it is framed or how many activists shout it from their social media accounts, there is no human right to be a woman. To say this is not protectionism of a category, and even if it was, it would be totally okay. It is just reality. Do not fall for those who want to make this a question of kindness extended towards vulnerable individuals. Nobody is disputing the vulnerability, but that does not make them change sex. So here is what has to happen. Politicians must regain the courage to truly engage with these issues. They must listen to women, to feminists, to lesbians and gays, to parents, to detransitioners, to all of the critical voices. Not with asterisks, not holding space for men, not proclaiming pronouns. Progressive parties must stop developing their position from opposition. And fear of defending women's rights. Women's rights are not reactionary, they are not right-wing, and they are not fascist. And they need to engage in debates around these issues without jargon, without linguistic manipulation, without obfuscation, and bring to light what has been going on behind closed doors. Thank you.